We are now taking over the airwaves. This is Ultimate You Radio. We are here to create extraordinary change through mindset, nutrition, and training. Life is way too short not to be the ultimate version of you.
Hello, Fit Fam. How are we doing? Andy Anderson here. And today we have an epic episode. We have an amazing guest. Our guest today is a scientist and entrepreneur and an expert in the field of physical and mental peak performance. He's done some truly incredible stuff, and I'll just share a few with you. He's the CEO of humanOS.me. He frequently does research with the Psychiatric and Behavioral Sciences Department at Stanford University. And he works with Naval Special Warfare units to help elite fighters in the world maintain alertness and capable mental performance under challenging circumstances. There's so much more that we could go through right now in order to hype up who this man is. But without further ado, I want to introduce you to Dan Pardy. Welcome to the UI podcast. Dan, how are you?
I'm doing great, Andy. Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely, my friend. And I know you've had a massive day. You've been doing other podcasts, team meetings, all that sort of stuff. So we are grateful that you joined us today. Thank you so much. Absolutely.
Well, luckily, interacting with people is energizing for me, not energy sucking, but I'll probably feel it later tonight.
You'll sleep well, which is a good
thing. Exactly.
Absolutely. So Dan, I mean, you've done so much, my friend, but let's start at the beginning. Can you please share a bit about your background and your journey into helping others with their healthy lifestyle and really what got you to where you are today?
Yeah, I'd love to. So my own journey started back when I was an athlete and I was playing soccer and basketball, super into it. I mean, it dominated my thinking every day. It's like, that's what I wanted to be doing. I got hurt. That made me focus on my body in a different way earlier in my life. And I think of that as sort of my origin story because, you know, when you haven't had a really serious injury, you don't think of your body in a certain way. You're just thinking about performance. When you have to bring your body back to a place where it's functioning again, working around issues, you have to be more dynamic. You have to think about all the different systems that are involved, and it just ignites a whole different type of thinking. And for me, that ended up leading to an interest in, academically. So I pursued a master's in exercise science, which I found fascinating. That went to do cancer research, looking at how lifestyle influences the progression of cancer, those things like stress management, diet, nutrition, et cetera, in this comprehensive lifestyle program for 180 patients. That's what I did after my graduate work. Then I worked in the pharmaceutical industry for almost a decade. I ran medical affairs for Jazz Pharmaceuticals, focusing on sleep. That's where I got into sleep. And then I left and I ended up creating a behavior model that was really inspired by former work that I did, which is all about, okay, what do we really need in order to be healthy in today's world? And how do we communicate this to people in a manner where they are the ones that empower themselves versus just listen in an infotainment-like manner, right? Because you can find somebody's message really interesting, but I'm always thinking about, does this make somebody more capable, better, stronger at being able to exploit this information for their benefit, not only next week or today, next week, but actually long-term. So that dominates my thinking now. And that led to the creation of humanOS. And so now I still do science research on sleep and lifestyle in the Netherlands and also at Stanford. And then I'm mostly full-time working on this project, humanOS, and I'm sure we'll get into the details of both today.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And again, you've done such an array of stuff, which, I mean, I'm really excited to get you to share some of your wisdom, but I'm definitely interested in the sleep side of things, because we know that I feel like it's a topic that's probably not talked about enough. And as you know, you're an entrepreneur as well as a scientist and well into the health and fitness game. And a lot of entrepreneurs out there and a lot of people in general really think that less sleep and just driving themselves continuously is maybe a positive thing, or that it's the way that it has to be in order to achieve success. But we often don't realize the massive negative effects it has on us. Can you tell us a little bit about the research that you've done in this space and why it's so important?
Absolutely. You know, you're absolutely right that societally, we signal that oftentimes we're like, oh gosh, you know, I I did this much, but I was on less sleep. And it's a way to sort of signal that, look how capable I am, even when I'm getting less sleep. So there's that interesting aspect. You know, when President Clinton was one of his first, in his inauguration speech back in the 90s, he said, I am going to stay up every night into the wee hours fighting for this country. So earlier on, it was a way to signal professionalism. If I take my job seriously, then I'm not going to be lazy and sleep. Yeah. And there's been a really big shift over the last, since that time, I'd say 20, 25 years, where sleep science has now become a better established scientific discipline. It's relatively new. Our understanding of the connections between sleep and how the body works, whether it's, of course, the brain is a part of the body, but mind functioning, brain, immune system, restoration, so many things. We now see those connections more clearly. And we're seeing a societal shift where it's actually the opposite is true. So if, you saying, gosh, I stayed up to the wee hours of the morning doesn't necessarily signal, as it did before, that you're professional, but actually taking care of your body and your health is now a new way to signal that you're a professional that takes your job seriously. And I like that. I like that change. Now, even though that's all there, that's important because it is the undercurrent. There's still more work to do, but it is the undercurrent upon which all of us are making decisions. It's still really difficult to get the sleep that we need because of the way that we live, what is normal, a normal lifestyle pattern, and the forces that shape our behavior. So we will talk about that. But to answer your question more specifically, the work that I do, and there's a lot of different aspects of sleep that I find interesting, but the work that I do is looking at when we're just getting a little bit less sleep. So what I call ecologically relevant amounts of sleep loss. When that means in our ecology, it's not normal that we get we just miss a whole night. Like, I didn't sleep at all Wednesday. But it's much more common where we miss an hour or two, or sometimes even 3 based off of our habitual sleep time. Yeah. That is endemic to how we live. And so what I look at is, how does the mind change in response to particular in relation to food choices. Now, food choices are, of course, very important because the way that, obesity is a huge problem in our world. It is considered by some to be actually probably one of the most significant problems the world faces today, given the fact that 50 to 100 other diseases associate with obesity once it occurs. We just can't afford to have a population that is obese, and this astronomical rise, 260% since the 80s in the rates of obesity. It is a very scary proposition. Sleep, we know, poor sleep associates with all things related to eating behavior and the acquisition of more adiposity or body fat. So it's a very interesting subject. It goes into 3 of my interests, which is feeding behavior, sleep, and behavior change, or behavioral economics. And that is the work that I do.
It's incredible. It's incredible. And it's so true. I mean, we are seeing this huge shift. It's never, health and fitness and lifestyle and education has never been more accessible in history. Yet it feels like as a society, we're getting sicker and fatter, and it's completely going against the grain. So, I mean, the work that you do is so important, and this is why the message has to get out there. But tell us a little bit more about how sleep affects weight loss, or the other way. How does it make you put on weight?
Yes. And that is a bidirectional relationship. So we know early on the early signals show lots of epidemiological work. So work that was looking at populations noticed that people that sleep less, so less than what's recommended is usually between 7 and 9 hours, 95% of people will fall into that range being sufficient on a nightly basis. But people that are sleeping 6 hours or less, they have a 55% increased risk for obesity. So that's a really clear signal. That made the scientific community interested in then looking specifically at what might be mediating or moderating that effect. And mediating is something that actually is explaining it completely. Moderating it is something that's influencing it. So that's a sort of a scientific distinction there. That's interesting. So some things might be influencing your body fatness. Some things are actually determining it. So first thing that was looked into were hormones. Hormones do change when you get less sleep. Things like leptin and ghrelin. These are hormones that are involved in the regulation of body fatness. So we know that, for example, leptin is a hormone that is released from fat. It travels to the brain and it tells the brain, this is how much fat you have in your body. And so when you aren't getting enough sleep, your body basically becomes insensitive to that signal. And so if your body's not hearing the signal, there's this amount of fat on your body. One of the potentially one of the different side effects of that is that your body's going to keep adding more fat because it's not well regulated. So that's one interesting association. When you get less sleep, that whole system is disrupted. Other systems that are involved in feeding, like, so for example, the endocannabinoid system is one. If anybody, when people smoke cannabis or marijuana, it is affecting the internal endogenous endocannabinoid system. And what is a common side effect of people that smoke weed or consume it in any fashion is getting the munchies, right? Yeah. And so when we get less sleep, our endogenous endocannabinoids rise in the afternoon, and that associates with later in the day munchies and eating. And so you're sort of like, it's the equivalent of inducing that in a natural state. And we know that people that tend to get less sleep, a lot of the calories that they do consume that are in excess come after dinner. And so and what are those calories made of? They're never made of broccoli and, good stuff for you. They're made for things that are energy dense, that taste delicious. We're seeking pleasure. We're not necessarily seeking more calories. And so a lot of people will kind of acknowledge that. Yeah, that's I just have the munchies before bed, or I'm full, but I'm just really craving something. So these are some of the factors that are going into controlling that. So then we have, the hormonal elements, and we also have what's happening in the brain. And we know that when we don't get enough sleep, if you were to show people images of food and you image the brain, so you could see what the inner workings are while somebody is seeing foods that they like or dislike. So you're showing them a picture of broccoli, you're showing them a brownie, you're showing them a picture, some carrots, you're showing them like an ice cream sundae. People's responsivity to those images is different when they didn't get enough sleep than they did. So the same brains under a baseline sleep condition. So when they got a normal amount of sleep, when you then deprive those people, their reactivity to those images is much different. And yeah, you see the reward areas in particular, the areas that actually are like, oh, I love that. They're off the chart. They light up like a Christmas tree. And so it's interesting then to match what we notice behaviorally. This is the behavior that we can easily observe. And then we can then say, well, this is the hormonal profile. And then this is actually the pattern of brain activity. And it all lines up. Now, of course, it's complex, and it's taken, over a decade to really unravel this. But those connections are quite clear. And, it's just one other reason that we need to sort of, attend to our sleep. But I always say that I love my job because I do talk about sleep a lot. My interest is across everything that actually does affect our health. But because I have this sort of unique background, and because there's a recognition that sleep is so important, I get to talk about it more. But, if you're a nutritionist, you're like, hey, don't eat that thing that you love. And because I talk about sleep, I'm like, hey, you know how good sleep feels? Yeah, do more of that. Yeah.
I mean, it's fascinating to link it all up. And I guess there's so many experts that just look at the single facets, but I think it's so important that we are connecting the dots between the sciences and, of course, health and nutrition and behaviorally. The mental side's so crucial. And what are your thoughts on, less sleep, of course, and I felt this myself, definitely. You're tired, you're run down. I guess you're definitely more likely to give it the instant gratification over delayed gratification. Are you saying that basically, it is a combination hormonally, chemically, as well as, energetically and fatigue? Do you find that humans get willpower fatigue, thus they're just giving into comfort? Is it more of the comfort-seeking element, do you think, is driving the behavior? Or what do you think is the core driver behind that decision-making process?
It's a very interesting question. And we have something called the neurocompetitive model of decision-making. So think about that. Neurocompetitive model, competition. Within the brain, you have an area of the brain when it sees, let's say, a donut, and you like donuts. It is responding to that. And it's saying, whoa, okay, I know I like it. I've had that before. I recognize it. And then you have other areas of the brain that are encoding the potential consequences of your actions. Like, you know what, though? They're not good for me. They're going to make me gain weight. So if you think about it, the part that responds first is the reaction. Oh, I love that. Then you have to override that with intellect and your willpower. So, you know what? No, but that doesn't really fit into what I'm trying to do. So if you now look at those parts of the brain under sleep loss conditions, you see that those areas, as I was mentioning previously, the areas that are responding to the reward really light up. What I didn't mention previously is the areas of the frontal cortex, sort of like the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. This is involved in decision making and behavioral control. This is your rationalization of your behaviors to say, you know what, this doesn't align with how I want to live. Those areas are notably fatigued under the conditions of sleep loss. Now, it's Will Baumeister's model out of Florida State. He's the big author on his life's work is in willpower. He describes it as this exhaustible resource. So the more that you're using willpower across the day, then whether it's choosing your clothes to wear, whether it's making decisions on food or making decisions at work, that you can actually exhaust that system, making you more susceptible and vulnerable to making poor choices later. Now, actually, a more elegant way to express that is actually to say it's a way to view it, but the reality is that we don't make poorer and poorer choices over the course of a day. So your better choices at 8 and your worst choices at, let's say, 9 p.m., 8 a.m. in the morning, 9 p.m. at night. But rather, you're more likely to be making poor choices as you're experiencing fatigue across the day. So, for example, middle of the afternoon, it could be later in the evening. But now that is all against the backdrop of how alert you feel that particular day. Right? Your mental energy for that day, and mental energy is not just a mere metaphor. This is something that is, because of the sleep that you got, that is going to be essentially changing the reactivity of parts of the brain called the brainstem. That is this reticular activating system that charges up your thalamus, and that is going to then cause cognitive arousal. And if that is weak, you end up with what's called state instability. So your ability to focus on a task, your ability to concentrate, to perceive information, so information processing, all of these things suffer in some very distinct ways. And what's probably most interesting is that, for example, you, Andy, your reaction time might stay fine when you've gotten not enough sleep. But your decision making or your emotional reactivity or your unique vulnerabilities might be different than mine. And so, unfortunately, sometimes people feel like, I am immune to the effects of sleep loss. And that might be true, but only for some cognitive domains and definitely not others.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, absolutely. Yeah, it is truly fascinating. And I mean, you've been working with, before I get to my next question.
Yeah.
That situation, you're in the middle of the day, you're grinding away, getting it done as we do, and you're starting to notice some of these vulnerabilities kick in. What's the best thing to do? Do I just go, I'm napping right now, or green smoothie, or quickly double espresso, as I like to do in the mornings? What would you suggest? Yeah.
I mean, those are all pretty good ideas. And unfortunately, and this actually has a lot to do with, humanOS and what I do, is that it's hard to necessarily lay out rules that apply perfectly in life to every situation so that somebody just follows those rules. Now, of course, as people involved in health, you want to make it as simple as possible. But I think a really huge opportunity is to make people better at understanding what those determinants are so that they can make those decisions themselves. Because today might be a little bit different for you than that same situation 2 days from now, because right now you've got a podcast, right? But then in a couple of days it might be a really good chance to nap. And you also know that you're going to be staying up a little bit later because you've got some plans with friends. So napping is now you don't want to be having a cup of coffee a couple hours before because you won't nap, right? You have to understand it well enough so that you serve as this, the marionette orchestrator to make the right decisions in your life versus me just say, nope, never nap, or yep, always nap. That is it's less flexible and it's going to not always work in your life. So that's a big part of, how I like to view what we do and what's needed. But like you said, okay, so if let's say you're just not, plugging away on all cylinders and you need a little bit of help. Well, what can you do within the day to perform better? Movement is actually a really good opportunity. Now, you don't necessarily feel like moving if you're feeling tired and weak and lethargic. And so what I like to always do is to lower the barrier of entry to a de minimis level so that it's easy to say yes to. Go for a walk around the block, do some light stretching, as you move, your own desire and willingness and ability to move more is heightened. And so sunshine, a little bit of physical activity, like you mentioned, a green smoothie or a green juice can actually have some pretty interesting effects on within day cognitive performance. It has a lot to do with the phytonutrients that are within greens and reds, and how that can affect within day performance. Things like glycine actually is shown to improve reaction time under sleep loss deprivations. Coffee definitely can too. And so I mostly focus on natural factors. Sometimes I will nap. What I found was a huge win for me was disconnecting from the need to be like, in this, okay, I'm going to go nap. Then I need to sleep in that nap. Rather, I'm saying, you know what? I'm going to give myself a 20-minute break with my eyes closed and just sit still. And if I fall asleep, great. And if I don't, that's okay too. It's still valuable. And that took the pressure off of having to fall asleep fast, making it less likely that I'm actually going to fall asleep during my nap period. That was a big one.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than that stress that you put on yourself when you're trying to sleep and you know you need to get to sleep, but you're staring at the ceiling and it's happening. Yeah, not cool. But yeah. I completely agree. It's all in context, isn't it? And I guess it's important to have a bit of an arsenal of tools you can use depending on what your lifestyle's like, what your business is, or what's happening during the day. Completely.
Yeah, I love that. I like that phrase, arsenal of tools. That's great.
Yeah, absolutely. So, again, I'm really interested in the work that you've done with the military. I mean, everyone, I guess, is fascinated by these incredible specimens and the work that they do. And it's very mentally demanding and they're mentally tough. And I guess I've personally always wondered what it would be like for these guys when they, whether it's in Hell Week or they're actually out in the field and they're sleep deprived, but they have to be at their best. They've got to be really performing at a high level. Can you give us, shed some light on, I guess, these guys and what happens when they're sleep deprived and some of the work that you do with them?
Sure. There's undoubtedly probably part of the selection process for advancement within these populations. They tilt towards those that can withstand sleep loss and perform well under those conditions. And that's genetic. That is genetic. Yet, one of the things is sort of old school training is the old school way. Be like, sleep's not important, tough it up. Mm-hmm. To a certain degree, that can be helpful when you don't worry a ton about the sleep loss. But the reality is that there is still impairment. And so it's a very difficult balance. You want people to not worry about the sleep loss and say, I can perform. At the same time, you don't want people to think sleep's not important. I'm not going to get it when I can. And that's tough, right? Because typically you're just hammering home one message when the reality is that you really are trying to be more sophisticated with both of those messages. And it's hard to say, you know what, sleep is so important, but we're not going to give you enough for the next couple of weeks. That can be tough. But within the day, we talk about things like polyphasic sleep. And this is things like, for example, if they are on a mission and they're going to be up for 100 hours. So they get a phone call and they need to be on a plane in 12 hours, wherever they are. They're flying for 12 to 16 hours. And when they arrive, they need to perform an operation, the consequences of which is somebody dying, hopefully not them.
Yeah.
That's the condition that these guys live in, where that call can come anytime. Whew. Okay, so some people can do this and some people can't. They need to be able to then stay relaxed enough. Can you imagine, like, any moment you could just get the call? That's tough. So how do you then control your own sympathetic nervous system to be able to keep that calm regularly, but also responsive? And then what do you do when you actually have to, again, travel for 16 hours and then perform when you get there? Might be a little hard to take a nap when you're going into a, potentially life-threatening situation. Most likely a life-threatening situation. So this idea of polyphasic sleep are things that you can just say, again, getting people to relax. Like, okay, if you don't actually fall asleep, that's okay. It's still beneficial. And that can it's the same sort of techniques that you can use in the middle of your day before a client comes in. Just the idea, I'm going to close my eyes for 20 minutes. And if I can the other thing that you can do, which is useful, is try to get out of your own head. And what happens is when you have, any sort of stressful situation that heightens the activity of the amygdala, that will then suppress sleep centers, sleep activating centers, and it'll increase the activity of alertness centers. That's why insomnia can be so tough, is because this rumination, this high level of anxiety makes it actually very hard to get to sleep. And then because you worry about the sleep itself, that is this vicious feedback loop. And so Greg, who's on my team, recently wrote an article about, this is on our blog, about doing some meditation, and you can do a body scan. And so you do this meditative process where you actually try to get out of your own thoughts and you focus on your toes and your feet, and you're guided through it. And what that does is it diverts your attention from your own monologue and into this external source that helps the body relax. There are techniques like that. And also letting people know getting 20 minutes of sleep is going to be better than getting none in that same period of time. Yeah. And so capitalizing on it, knowing like, oh, you know what, I'm feeling that urge, that sleepiness right now, go with it, get the sleep that you can. Might not get it again, but if you do, you can react again, get a little bit more. So those are pretty unique situations, but there are still things we can learn from them. And, and I still utilize this information into my day as well. And then of course, there are stimulants and other things that override, obviously want to be on peak alertness. You don't want to rely on those all the time, but in a situation like that, you want to. And that's critical as well, because overstimulation can lead to poor decision-making. We tend to think that the more stimulated we are, the better we're going to perform. But overstimulation, this Yerkes-Dodson curve, means that you're going to have more anxiety. Anxiety is going to interfere with clarity in decision-making. So even for these guys, they have to have a really good self-assessment. Where am I right now? What do I need? What can I do? What are my options? And then what's my arsenal? Plug this in now, perform.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, it's truly inspiring. I mean, it's crazy what they achieve. And of course, the pressure that they can handle and making those decisions is, it's phenomenal. It's great that you get to work with people like that and make such a big difference in their lives, because it is life or death, isn't it? At the end of the day, it's huge.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it could be, I'll just say, it could literally be the matter of their life, or it could be the matter of their life, casualties, and their teammates' lives, right? Those are all consequences of poor decision-making because of sleep loss and stress. And so all of those we want to avoid.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned stimulants, and I've always been curious around nootropics. And I wonder what's your opinion on that in regards to peak performance and I guess getting the edge and being more alert and things like that. Do you recommend it, or do you feel like what comes up must crash down, or what's your opinion?
Yeah. So I love the idea of a nootropic is this, something that helps you perform well mentally now, but also one that keeps your brain healthier long-term. That specifically is a nootropic. Separately, there are cognitive enhancers where we know that they improve cognitive performance now, and we're either unsure or have knowledge that they don't necessarily help the brain either be healthier, or there's some limitation, there's a risk involved, like Adderall and amphetamines. Okay? So that's the distinction. There's a huge amount of diverted Adderall in universities. Why? Because it works. Right? Adderall will upregulate the activity of dopamine in the brain, and that helps you it helps you with focus, because it makes boring activities a little more interesting to work on, and it helps you focus more intently. So there's a huge amount of diverted in Adderall. So meaning that it might be prescribed by a doctor to somebody that has diagnosed ADHD, but that prescription is then diverted and sold, and I think something like up to 40% of Adderall in universities is diverted. So it's what it does is it speaks to the fact that you get this very clear cognitive advantage if you use it, and that advantage is desired. Enter nootropics. Is there a way that we can find that way to boost our mental performance, but that doesn't have as much of a downside? That's the concept. Now, what I also like about nootropics is this idea that instead of just trying to hammer one system, you're actually looking at all different systems that are involved. Can you augment blood flow to the brain? Can you provide precursors to neurotransmitters that are involved in thinking and concentration? Can you provide certain substances that interfere with the breakdown of those neurotransmitters so that they stay active in the synapse for longer? Can you do things that address some of the metabolic byproducts of high energy usage so that there's less toll being taken from high levels of mental usage? So those are all the different concepts that are going into stacks, right? And a stack is a combination or formulation of compounds that theoretically work synergistically to keep you performing well. Now, what are the different domains that you can perform well? Well, it can help you with focus. And that tends to be, if you think about cognitive control, which is a degree of focus, we have, first of all, when we're focusing on something, we have a lot of information that is in our perceptual field, right? Like when I'm talking to you, I'm mostly looking at you, but I can see the lions behind you, but I'm not thinking about, those have been filtered out, right? Because I'm looking at you, we're talking face to face. We're doing that all the time. We're filtering stuff we can see, and that is a part of focus. The other thing that we do when we focus is we inhibit what are called automatic prepotent responses. And this is what's one of the problems that kids that have ADHD is that all the stimuli in their sensory field is making their bodies react to it they can't suppress those automatic responses, and it makes them hyperactive. Okay, so that actually gives you a window into what focus really is. You're having to, and that's why they give stimulants, is because it takes energy to do that. It's hard to do that. So that's one area, is to help with focus. Another area is to then focus on stamina and duration. Can you focus for longer? Can you augment memory? Are there substances that are involved that affect some part of the memory formation process that allow for greater acquisition of information that you're working on? Are there things that actually will affect things like working memory, which is a part of focus? But working memory is how many pieces of information can you hold in your mind at one time as you're solving problems, as you're doing calculations, as you're thinking about whatever the problem is that you're doing. And being able to add a little bit more capacity to working memory ends up having really powerful effects. So, yes, there is pretty good research, mostly done in people that have cognitive impairment. And so that's one of the interesting parts. It's also one of the limitations. Let's say, theoretically, you take, something is tested in somebody that has Alzheimer's disease and it had absolutely no effect. That same substance working in a brain that is not encumbered by amyloid plaques and neurofibrillary tangles, there might be actually a legitimate effect. It just didn't reveal itself in the Alzheimer's brain. And so luckily, we do have safety and efficacy work. And a lot of these compounds that are now used as nootropics basically failed to have meaningful cognitive enhancement in conditions, dementia, including Alzheimer's disease. But you go back to younger brains, that the benefit to them might be, it can help you perform better now, and it keeps your brain healthier longer. And so that is an introduction and sort of an overview of the field of nootropics. I'm optimistic about it. I also think we're going to have this two different situations where, this concept that I introduced of a stack is multiple different compounds together. There's going to be all sorts of stacks that are made, not tested. Now, so you could have, let's say, theoretically 5 different substances that independently have proven safety and efficacy, and you put them together, what's going to happen? Maybe maybe you're introducing more risk, and it is a bit of the Wild West right now. So, you want to tread carefully with your brain, but what I would look at if you're evaluating any substance to improve cognitive performance is, because let's be honest, like how we perform mentally is really that's our survival advantage today. That is, we can have a good physique that to attract the opposite sex or the person of interest for you. And you can also use that to maintain a functioning body, but we don't need to in today's world for the most part. What we do need is a really good functioning brain. That's going to create a lot of opportunities. And therefore the pressure is on to figure out ways to do that. And so I'm optimistic and I'm also cautious. People will make mistakes. There probably will be deaths and people that are injured, sadly. And then there'll be, a big crackdown on it. And I can foresee all of this happening. So my hope is that before people are hurt and before there's sort of more draconian level enforcement that sort of just classifies the whole thing as dangerous, we're able to get to a point where we can show that some people are really benefiting in meaningful ways that creates a more balanced discussion on usage of these compounds over the course of a lifespan.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's a really exciting space to look at, no doubt. And yeah, personally, I'm really excited to see some of the studies that come out over the next few years. And hopefully, as you said, we do it in a more safer manner before people do get hurt. But again, a very fascinating field to look at. I'm also, really interested about nutrition and brain health. I mean, it's so important. I've done some great podcasts with some amazing doctors, etc. Dr. Perlmutter is a great example, talking a lot about how, of course, sugars and whatnot affect the brain, and Alzheimer's starts to kick in, and a whole bunch of crazy stuff. And I guess I want to know your opinion on peak performance and brain health, clarity, focus, all those things. What do you think is really the best diet for sustained focus, brain health for long term and now?
Yeah. So it's, diet is such an interesting question. It ends up being more about religion than it is about science. And the reason why is because nutrition is really difficult to study. And there's so many criticisms about nutritional epidemiology, but it's also the best way. It's one of the best ways to understand the long-term, multi-generational, multi-decade effects that a diet has on the body. So there's all these different research types, right? There's basic research in animals. There's the gold standard of randomized clinical trials. There's epidemiology. They all have limitations. They all have their advantages. And while it's very easy to always criticize any one individual study, the sagely person has to step back and try to read what the field of work tells us, see the trends, and to sort of establish wisdom beyond the individual paper. So what do I think are really the key determinants here? One is figuring out a way to eat where you actually have good calorie control. So we know, for example, my collaborator, Stefan Guillenet, we created the Ideal Weight Program, and that is really oriented towards helping people lose weight. But I think one of the most interesting applications of it is people that are just interested in maintaining their weight without gaining fat over the lifespan. And we look at key determinants for calorie consumption, things like palatability, things like food variety, fiber, protein, and create some parameters that then say, okay, you can eat this way and you're not going to gain fat because your body's going to experience fullness before you overconsume. And the way that our world is set up, that all the foods that are manufactured and created, it's not for any nefarious reason, for the fact that they need to be competitive in the marketplace. They need to hit that sweet spot. And that sweet spot of taste for food tends to be one that is hyper palatable, right? It is more palatable than naturally rewarding food. And that has the dual benefit, that has the dual drawback of you eat more calories before you're full and more calories after. So think about that. More calories before you're full means that the type of processed foods, like highly processed, ultra processed foods, or highly palatable ones, before you actually experience fullness, you've taken in more calories. And the latter half of that statement, this is a little proverb I came up with when I gave the keynote at PaleoFX a few years ago. More calories after you're full is, okay, I'm experiencing full, but because the food tastes so good, I'm going to continue to eat more. Now, why am I going into this? Because calorie amount, a hypercaloric state, which a lot of us live in, is in itself problematic for brain functioning and long-term brain health. One of my favorite diets is the Mediterranean diet. I think that there is no diet that has more research on it. So there could very well be a better diet that's out there. We just don't know it because all diets have not had the benefit of longer term evaluation. And what's so cool about the Mediterranean diet is that people can do it. Huge, right? And because it actually does really taste really good. It's pretty high it's very high in fat, olive oil, And then it's high in stuff that makes people like, yeah, I can stick with this. That's key. But whether you're looking at the prevention of primary heart attacks, so first time heart attacks, secondary heart attacks, looking at metabolic syndrome, blood pressure regulation, cognitive performance, whatever has been evaluated under the Mediterranean diet, it always shows a very positive effect. And that actually makes sense. If it's good for the body, you're going to see it be good across every way that you study it. So I'm very optimistic about it. Personally, I do. And by the way, one of the reasons why I think it's good is because it naturally lets you take in fewer calories and feel totally satisfied. What we do with the Ideal Weight program is try to emphasize some of the principles of the Mediterranean diet and sort of optimize those for leanness. But mental performance, I'm kind of talking about different aspects of nutrition. But calorie consumption is a really important one for brain performance. When we are constantly providing an environment of hypercaloric state, then you end up seeing damage to things like mitochondria. Mitochondria are the powerhouses of cells that then when you end up seeing, not enough mitochondrial stimulation, then you lose mitochondria. And you also stop initiating certain programs that are cancer preventative, that promote antioxidant abilities, that keep stem cell pools active. And so just getting like fasting, I think a really cool advancement is in this widespread use of intermittent fasting. So narrowing your eating window, and then also taking, certain times, a couple times a month, or there's all different protocols, but limiting total calories for at least part of the day. And then also occasionally doing like a 5-day fast. So that's really important. Nutrient density. Are you getting adequate amounts of micronutrients like vitamins and minerals? Are you getting an adequate amount of things that don't have daily values like phytonutrients? These are things like phenols, betalains, glucosinolates, flavonoids, isocyanates, on and on and on. Many of these showing really impressive benefits to long-term cognitive health, to stem cell, clearing out senescent cells, which are these cells that accumulate with age. We don't want to prevent them from occurring. We want to clear them once they've occurred. So diet is massive and nutrient dense, one that has a lot of satisfaction, that can keep your calories under control, and one that has a lot of, then I think you have a pretty big range to work in those parameters and just eat the way you want.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I agree. I think that I personally find that fat for me is so crucial for my focus. And it's amazing with stress levels during the day, I feel 100% less anxious and a lot calmer, a lot able to handle stressful situations. Of course, when my nutrition is on point, and that's of course what we always teach and preach here at Ultimate You is how to integrate nutrition and movement to make sure that mindset and emotional stability is intact and prolonged, and you can be in peak performance. And of course, that's what you always speak about. Would you say that, great nutrition aids in neuroplasticity and your ability to learn new things, etc.?
Yeah, so we know that so neuroplasticity is the ability for neurons in our brain to disconnect from one another and then reconnect to a different neuron, depending on experience. And what's so interesting about that is that it means that we don't need to be born with pre-programmed instincts that determine how we respond to every situation from birth. Rather, we get to respond to new information within our lifestyle to continually make better decisions based off of our experience. That is really the essence of neuroplasticity. And in fact,
how exciting is that, by the way? I just love the concept. It gives people the hope and the knowledge that you can do more, be more, always, right? And so
that's absolutely right.
Think they cannot, and I love it. Sorry to cut you off.
Not at all. So, probably the biggest component of neuroplasticity is sleep. In fact, one of the reasons why, I know we're talking about nutrition, but one of the reasons why, like probably the leading argument for why sleep occurs in the first place, is to provide a stable environment for this energetically costly process of neuroplasticity to occur. So you traverse the world with getting new experiences over the 16-hour period of a day. And at night, your body needs this stable period for those neurons to, again, connect, reconnect. And that enables you to learn That is what learning is basically neuroplasticity. Memory is a part of that process. And that hopefully means that you are making better decisions. Doesn't always. You can learn the wrong thing, but it enables that capability. Now, we know that nutrients are involved with neuroplasticity as well, and brain health. And so you want to keep your mitochondria strong. We talked a little bit about that. You want to make sure that you have adequacy of a lot of the micronutrients that we know there are daily values for. You want to get a certain type of stress, and actually the value of a lot of these phytochemicals like the isothiothionates and the flavonoids and the phenols and the terpenes and all that, they cause a little bit of a stress response to the body. It's like exercise. And that stress response is important for initiating all these programs that then keep health, maintain health. And so what specific nutrients are involved in neuroplasticity? It's, I don't have a specific list that I can call upon, but generally we know that living a healthy lifestyle is going to enable you to learn faster and maintain that ability over the lifespan. So watch alcohol consumption, watch things that interfere with that process, watch things that steal sleep, make sure that you've got the right amount of nutrients. And so, a healthy diet is going to support neuroplasticity, but make sure that you're also getting enough exercise. Make sure that you're doing things that challenge your body's coordination abilities, right? So not just, I'm going to push it hard in the weights and on the treadmill, but am I actually learning different new types of skills where I'm moving my body in a pattern that actually challenges me? I can't really do it at first, but now I work on it and I can do it. Now I do something different. All of those things will continue to facilitate an environment where neuroplasticity is optimized.
Yeah, truly fascinating, truly fascinating. Dan, tell us about your company. I've been really wanting to hear more about it. humanOS.me. Tell us more about what you guys do there, and I'd love to know more. Yeah,
absolutely. So this is all based off of this behavior model that I developed years ago, and the model is called the Loop model to sustain health behaviors. And so the idea is for an individual to adopt something and sustain it long term, what needs to happen? Well, it's good for them to understand why they're doing the behavior, and this could be a matter of like why I'm doing everything that relates to my health practice to why I consume strawberries to get fisetin, right? So from very, very specific and individual to broader and more comprehensive. But you need to know why. And I'll explain that in a moment. But the next part is how. So a good analogy here is you could totally recognize what riding a bike looks like, but learning how to do it is another step, right? You could spot a million times, like, that's riding a bike, but until you've actually developed that skill and done it personally, that can be a barrier for you actually doing it. Then there is, am I doing it? So that what I like to, let's say you read this book, a book that totally captivates you and you're really into it and you're fired up and you develop these skills and you go through this kitchen prep that the book goes through. What is going to ensure that you're continuing to do this 8 months from now? Life gets busy. You've got this contract that is taking up all your time, right? What is going to keep you engaged in it beyond the halo of captivating your interest by, reading that book or first getting exposure to an idea? And then lastly is it working, right? So why should I do it? How do I do it? Am I doing it? And is it working? And you can see that those are really 4 distinct parts of a person's health practice. The is it working is distinct from the am I doing it part, because the am I doing it is, am I doing the things that get me results? The is it working is, what is my performance, cognitive performance, mental performance, gym performance? What about my blood work? Are there markers of health? How do I compare to people my age? And so you can get some deeper insight into your body. And now in the messiness of real life, you might actually get a health risk assessment done first, or you might start using a tracker and then learn why you want to do it. I mean, it can happen and come flow in all different directions, but explaining it that way is useful. And so what I've done is turn that into a tool called humanOS. And what we do is we create peer-reviewed health courses that are short, and we try to promote fluency. So the idea is that you do not need to be a PhD in all of these subjects, but if you have the ability to sit down and have a conversation with your friend about it, you're much more likely to exploit that information for your own benefit. If let's say you're like, wow, I heard this really interesting podcast, but you can't really talk about it, it's hard to benefit. It's hard to then, you don't know enough for it to change how you live. But it might be an important step in getting there. But right, that's really where we're going with it. So then, can we make somebody's day easier. So we have daily workouts, we have daily recipes. Can we just simplify your health practice? Can we make day a little bit easier by giving you some options? And you may choose to use those or not on that given day or ever. But the idea that you're actually kind of part of what I think we need is to have tools that we engage with regularly that keeps us mindful to make health a part of every day, even if it's just part of one of the apps that we open, right? And why is that? Because we can't, when we constantly are saving things for the weekend, the majority of life is getting populated by non-health activities. We want to make your health a part of every single day, even if it's just a matter of like, reading a little bit about some health technique, right? Engage, looking at your data from your tracker. That alone is really key. And so then we're integrated with about 40 different services from Fitbit to, Strava. And that the idea is there, can we take your data and personalize this system for you? So it's, you get to see, how am I actually living? So we're going to continue to add really cool tools to the site, but generally to pan back, the idea of humanOS is, can we make you more knowledgeable about things that can help you? Can we make you more knowledgeable about yourself? And can we make you better and empowered at putting it all into practice? And that is, I think, the right mindset for people to have, is that instead of this idea where it's like, I'm going to learn everything and then I'm cool. Be at peace with the fact that you'll probably do things a little bit differently next year. And the year after that, you'll do things a little bit differently. So be open to learning. Okay. Be open to trying and even failing. Right. And always be, try to understand an idea really well, but don't become a zealot. Right. Listen to what really works, analyze it, and just have this very good relationship with your body, what's out there. And that's why one thing I'd encourage is everybody that's interested, go to humanos.me. One of the first course that we try to get everybody to watch is called Road of Health. And it's basically 25 minutes. It's the thesis of what we do. And the first thing I say is, I'm not going to try to teach you everything about health right now. I'm going to just put you in the right frame of mind to address this problem adequately over your life. And I think one thing that we see with health tools is that, and people that create them and with public health figures, is that everything is trying to just come up with the technology where it's going to do everything for you. It's not going to happen unless it's a pill. If you don't understand why you're doing it, people might not even take the pill. We see that with compliance all the time. So we need to empower people to be better agents at their own health. And there are tools that can really be helpful, but you cannot extract yourself from that formula and have it be successful. So the first thing that needs to happen is you need to be in that right frame of mind. And then, my step tracker, which a lot of people are like, oh, it's boring and it's not useful. I make this useful for me, right? I empower it with value, and then it helps me. It's not going to walk for me. I walk more because I listen to it and I understand that steps are valuable and I pay attention to it. And I have like 1,000 steps a day because I've been on the phone. I'm a total hypocrite. Don't listen to me. I've been standing here for literally like 8 hours. So yeah, and I'd love to, your audience, we'll create a code if you're interested, and it'll give, if you want to check it out, it'll make it $1 for the first month. And that way you can get in there. Yeah. I
would love that. Absolutely would love that. I want to ask you, what's your vision for the next 10 years? What sort of impact do you want to truly make?
I don't think of vanity metrics like I want to have 5 billion people using this. I would love that. But honestly, because to the degree that it is helpful to those people, what I care most about is finding a group of people that are compelled by the vision, that want to utilize the tools for their own benefit and in the right way. And if I end up helping, I'd love to help over the course of my lifetime 1 million people, which is a huge amount. And that's, no VC or anybody's going to get that excited about that. But if I honestly help them to a significant degree, then I will, feel really accomplished.
I love that. It's really exciting, man. I love the work that you're doing. One last question before we wrap it up, my friend. If we could put you in a time machine and send you back to your younger self, what message would you give yourself in order to improve your life right here, right now? Is there something that, some golden nugget, one thing that you would tell your younger self?
Yes, I know exactly what it is. So I've been, I talked a lot about the Mediterranean diet on this podcast. We're making a course, one of my favorite authors in the space, on the paleo diet. But the paleo diet is a part of the ancestral health methodologies. Ancestral health is looking at pre-modern lifestyle patterns as the basis for directing how you live today. And what we're going to find increasingly is that that is an extraordinary source of wisdom for how we live. Whether it's how much light we're getting in the morning, in the afternoon, at night, whether it is the type of foods that we're generally trying to get into our diets, whether it's the type of exposures that we have in terms of cold and hot. We spent millions of years evolving under a condition set that makes these natural factors like light, temperature, right, foods, etc. They're not just helpful to our health; they're a part of our health. And it's hard to think of it sometimes because that light bulb that's up there in the corner is not a part of me, but it actually matters. It might as well be, right? It helps my body function. My body needs the right type of light. And what's so useful, and what a lot of the critics, the straw man critics of paleo create is criticisms that are missing the bigger picture. Is that probably the coolest thing about paleo is that this concept, this ancestral health concept, is that it is a heuristic, right? A heuristic that guides how we can live. Just try to live as naturally as you can. And that might mean, it might look very different for different people. But if you skew towards thinking, what would life be like if I was living, outside in the savannah, and using that to sort of guide more of your behaviors, then a lot of things fall into line. And now I think that is one informational source. We also have to use science, but I've always described humanOS as sort of part ancestral health wisdom combined with science and then technology to empower it all. And even then, I think it makes sense to know about all sorts of diets, because your deeper, broader understanding of dietary knowledge can be expanded upon when you know more than one thing. If you just know one diet and that's it, and if somebody comes along with a good criticism, it could totally pull the rug under from your own belief in it, which then all of a sudden you're not doing it anymore because you're like, I'm not sure if I'm confident still. But when you learn things about Mediterranean and paleo, you start to see these trends and you're like, okay. Now I'm even more confident to know really how, where I'm, like what I should be trying to do. So that's sort of my thoughts on it, but that's what I would tell my younger self.
I love it, Dan. I love it. Dan, tell us, where can we see more of you? Tell our community where we can find you, and where they can read up on some more of your stuff. Yeah, totally. So, I'm going to give you that code for humanOS. There's a basic plan, which is free, and there's a pro plan, which is $9.99 a month. The code will make the first month $1, so you can check it out. We have a blog and a podcast. My podcast is the official podcast of the Sleep Research Society, working with the Canadian Sleep Society right now about making it a part of a formal part of their mission. And we cover more than just sleep, but I do cover sleep quite a bit. And that's been an awesome that these really well-established old institutions are wanting to pair with me. I cover aging, behavioral science. So that's been fun to do, to have conversations with, what I mostly do is interview professors who are doing the original research, and I try to get them to explain their findings and then what it means. And so that's been fun. But yeah, so that's blog at humanOS.me. But I just say, go to humanOS.me and you can find our links from there. And what I would say is, I'm not going to try to sell anybody on they do this on our site, but I'm really excited that people get to that they know about it. And what I would say is, find what works for you. So try it, give it an earnest effort, and see, instead of do I like this, look at, can this help me be better at doing these things? And whether or not you might just check in and read a blog occasionally, cool. Whatever. This is about you and what works for you. And we love that. And if we never make $1 off of you, but we're helping you in some way, that's a win. Awesome, Dan. Dan, thank you so much for joining us. I know our community is going to get so much out of today's podcast. Again, community, if you're loving this, go and check it out. There's so much goodness there. We're going to stick the code in the comment section under where you're going to see this post. And I really hope you enjoyed. Dan, thank you again, my friend, and good luck with everything in the future. And I hope we get to chat again soon.
Andy, I'd love that. Thank you for having me on. I've really enjoyed it. And yeah, I look forward to next time.
Thank you, Dan. See you next time.